Hey there, this is Celia with Embodied with Plants. Thanks for listening. Today I'm going to talk about why I think it's important to talk about Lyme and the co-infections. I would love to step into talking more about chronic illness and pain, fatigue, and infections in so many different capacities. But before I can just jump in, I need to do something for myself, and that is continually connect with the reasons why I think it's important to speak about this. Not as a practitioner or somebody giving out information or anything like that, just more for myself. And that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm not going to talk about Lyme and Bartonella and Mycoplasma and Babesia and Anaplasma in detail. Instead, I'm going to outline what I am coming to realize are the reasons to listen to people with Lyme and the co-infections, and for us to speak and share what is going on with us. The main reason I want to do this is because, well, I've been working on kind of different writings and content related to Lyme for a while, and something happens when I come very close to publishing something or making a video, and that is I begin to totally shut down. And I am laughing because it just happens all the time, and I was like, okay, what is going on? And what I realized is the majority of the time where I have told people how I feel experiencing Lyme and the co-infections, well, even before I knew that's what my deal was, I was not listened to, I was not heard, I was completely gaslit, and I did not receive adequate care. And this is coming from the medical system. If you have Lyme, the co-infections, then you know what I'm talking about. For some reason, I mean, there are reasons, but it just so happens that Lyme is not accepted and looked at in our medical system. Now, in general, medical system does not shine in treating chronic infections. They're hard to treat, and it's just not their area of expertise, and that's totally understandable. Like, I don't have any judgment or hard feelings on that. I do have some issues with why Lyme has been such a manipulated topic, but I'm not going to go into that on here. You can go down a rabbit hole and spend forever learning about the politics of Lyme. There is a book called The Cure Unknown. You could look at that. I was a medical researcher whose kids got Lyme. She looked into why they weren't getting adequate treatment and opened this huge can of worms as how Lyme became so politicized and controlled, and all this information was suppressed. I'll put a link in the bottom to all of these. There's also a movie called Under Our Skin 1 and 2. They talk a little bit about the problems within the medical system, pharmaceutical industry about Lyme. So if you feel like it, you can check those out. The documentary Under Our Skin 1 and 2 is pretty good overall. It doesn't talk about that or focus on the political aspects of it. It's more about the people with Lyme and things that they've experienced. So overall, that's a really good introduction to Lyme if you want to learn more. So when I would start to, let's say, talk about Bartonella, I was writing about this flare that I had, and the story begins with me sitting up here in my attic with my kids on a Friday night, 6 p.m., and suddenly my liver started hurting. That's how my Bartonella flare began. And I just couldn't share that or write about it or publish it because I had this shame and this feeling like, you're not gonna listen. I can tell you till I'm blue in the face and there's nothing you can do. I've just been, going to the doctor for so long to try to get care, and it didn't pan out. And instead I felt very sad about it. So I realized, like, oh my gosh, this is why I can't get through this story. I can't even talk about this until I validate my own self as a sick person publicly. So, I mean, I don't have to do it publicly, but in order for me to, let's say, write an article about it or give information, I had to start at ground zero, which is this. It's like, why is it important? I have to reiterate and connect those reasons to help me through that barrier of like, oh no, people aren't gonna believe me. I'm gonna keep getting gaslit. So thus this video. Okay, so I'm gonna get into some ideas. I have my notes over here. All right, so the first one I just said, people with Lyme are gaslit by the medical community. That sounds like impossible. Like, I met a lot of people who were like, what? Doctors? No, they would never do that. Clearly you haven't had chronic fatigue or Epstein-Barr or Lyme. Now, there are individual doctors who are very caring and wonderful. In fact, I had an MD was the one that helped me get tested. She couldn't do anything with those test results, and we had to talk in code about it. So that was kind of weird. And she's there for me the best that she can. But it's, you know, the medical system overall. Because the medical system has such strong power and authority here where I live, the so-called United States, at least, they have so much power and authority that what happens with them is kind of the word. I used to study anthropology. That was my undergrad degree. And there were I took a medical anthropology class, and I remember reading books about, I'm trying to think. There was an anthropologist who actually went to med school and looked at the culture of medical schools in the US, and he wrote a book about it. It's a little dated, but it's still interesting. But basically, the author's point was that the medical system is the closest one has a godlike power in our country, Western world. Now, I'm not anti-Western medicine. I used to be at one point. I had a lot of grief and pain, not about Lyme, about something else. But before that happened, I was very, very pro-Western medicine. When I was in high school, I wrote a paper, like an English senior thesis sort of paper about how if herbal medicine worked, doctors would give it to you. I watched some sort of 2020 or Dateline video about St. John's wort, and at this time in journalism, they don't have this anymore as far as I know. But if something was on TV or a news article was written, the journalist had to make a point and then make a counterpoint. And so they were talking about St. John's wort and echinacea to a certain extent, how they work and what they do and the power of herbal medicine. And then they had to bring somebody in and say all the bad things about them or potential dangers or the side of somebody who was against it. And I heard the people who were against it, and I glommed onto that. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Teenagers we think of them as being rebellious, but really they're just testing boundaries. But when it comes to intellectually what's happening with them, they're very, very conformative. And that's what I was doing. And I think that's completely fine. I understand where I was coming from. I have no shame or judgment if somebody is pro-medicine or anti-medicine. I don't care. I've been on both sides. Now I don't stay up at night worrying about the medical system, not even about Lyme. I just hope for a better way. And I know that people who DIY their Lyme treatment are actually doing pretty good. Antibiotics sometimes don't work for people 30 to 40% of the time. So in any case, it's good to have options that are not just one way. So I'm not excusing any bad behavior that has happened, but okay, just want to say that I have felt part of the pain of having Lyme and the co-infections is the lack of care the mistreatment, and in some cases, for some people, medical trauma that comes with having a disease that is not recognized in the medical community. It's completely the epitome of gaslighting, and when it happens to your body, it's like somebody with a godlike power is saying, I don't believe you. No matter what you go through, I just don't believe it. And I'm gonna have to put you over into the crazy box. Would you like some antidepressants? Maybe you have fibromyalgia. And I'm like, I know I'm not depressed. You can send me in for 100 more RA tests. I'll go see the rheumatologist 15 times. I don't have lupus. I know what's going on. It's Lyme. And they're not able to take that information in, and it hurts, I just have to say that. And I think that's a normal reaction. So when it comes to myself, the whole basis of me being able to talk about Lyme is that I have learned not to talk about Lyme. I've heard to hide those weird stories where I had this Bartonella affair. The first symptoms I had, I felt like an ice shard was stabbing my liver. I'm like, oh God, I can't say that. Nobody's gonna believe me. I've said that before and it's only led to pain. So I'll just hide it. That's what I have done. So I'm trying to overcome that in a gentle way. So before I go on to the other reasons I want to talk about Lyme, there were some reasons that I considered maybe I shouldn't talk about Lyme that weren't just about medical gaslighting and what I've learned about having to stay silent. One of the reasons I was considering if I even should talk about this is because every person with Lyme and the co-infections is gonna have a different scenario. There are some overlaps between, like Bartonella symptoms are kind of like this and Lyme's kind of like this. So there are some generalities, but we're all so different. We have different experiences and whatnot. And so I wondered, is it useful for me to be so self-referential when it comes to something that's so individual? And I just am going to go ahead and share what I may on this channel whenever it feels like a good time. But just know that it's just an example of one person. It can be different for everybody. It's not so much about what happens to me, although if there's a confirmation, that's great. I love that serendipity that can come like that. I have definitely heard it from people in Lyme groups or books or whatnot. But I'm not expecting that to happen. And it's more so about, here's my story. What's your story? Like, what's happening for you? How can you be more comfortable sharing? Maybe you already are. And if that's the case, tell me how you do it. I think we can have a mutual benefit to creating a culture of sharing and honoring one another's experiences. I did have to kind of sink into my body and ask, like, is it okay for me to talk about this? It's one thing to say I have been gaslit by the medical community because they don't believe in the disease that I have. It's another thing to tell that to my body. Like, if my body's not safe, if I really, I have to negotiate that. Because I can mentally or even spiritually or emotionally think, I want to bring light onto what it's like having Lyme. My body might be like, I feel really exposed and I don't know what to do with that. Like, we have to negotiate our own sense of safety, even if my mind or my heart or whatever is totally on board. So just keep that in mind. And I think that's normal. One other side of that is that being somebody who's chronically ill, I've become very good at hiding in general. And sometimes I wonder if I'm just complaining, because I know people who have serious illnesses who their life is threatened. So I think, what is the value of me just talking about having no energy and being sick all the time and in pain? Well, I think I've come to realize and reconnect with what's most important for me. I think it is really important to talk about these things. I'll just say one word: opiate crisis. Like, chronic pain is a big fucking deal. We need to find ways to get over that and prevent or mitigate damage that is unnecessary. So anyways, that's an example of how I negotiated that sense of safety. Was like, yeah, I know you feel exposed, but I think we can do it. Okay. One reason that I want to talk about Lyme and the co-infections is hidden within that sentence. Lyme and the co-infections. Co-infections. Can we talk about co-infections? Co-infections are just as important as Lyme, if not more. I'm going to say it. Lyme is important and painful and causes all sorts of horrible things. They're the reason that co-infections come in. But co-infections can cause a lot of damage. And I feel like I was ill-prepared. As a practitioner, I'm an acupuncturist and an herbalist. This is my 20th year being in the herbal world. So I'm just loving that I've had this tool for so long, but yet I still feel like I'm just beginning. But there was a time where I worked with a naturopath and a acupuncturist who specialized in hard to treat antibiotic resistant Lyme. And I worked with her for 2 years, and working with her made me realize how I probably still had Lyme. I had Lyme when I was 8. I had a bullseye rash when I was 8, and I had the treatment, whatever they did at the time. And at 12, I was chronically fatigued. And at 14, I had chronic pain. And I've been sick and ill with different things ever since. So it was going to see working with her and taking intakes and giving acupuncture to her patients as an assistant, but I was like, holy crap, I have this. I got tested. For some reason, the test came back positive. If you know anything about Lyme and testing, the tests are not the most accurate. But for some reason, mine came back positive. I had a Western blot and ELISA antibody test, and they both were positive. So that was a confirmation I needed. And I'm glad I got those tests, for sure. And it worked out as it did. I don't have any regrets or wish anything different, but I just had in my mind, because I was new and naive, I guess, that it was Lyme, Lyme, Lyme. Nobody said Bartonella, Bartonella, Bartonella. I mean, the chronic pain I had when I was 14 was probably from Bartonella and not from Lyme. So, I mean, Lyme was a part of it, of course, but I think that we just need to give that much more attention. And it doesn't matter if you're taking antibiotics or some other sort of, medical treatment, or you're doing herbal treatment. Both cases, don't forget the co-infections. Like, I partially made this video just so I could write co-infections in big letters. Like, that's a big driving force for me, because they cause so much pain and suffering, my people. Okay. So speaking about clinical symptoms, I really want to talk about how we feel and what our experiences are having Lyme and the co-infections, because clinical symptoms are what tell you if you have Lyme or not. That's how the diagnosis should be made. Can we really trust medical guidelines? They've led us down very bad paths with Lyme before, but I'm going to refer you to Dr. Rawls on this. He talks a lot about, not like a lot, like he doesn't have chapters upon chapters in his books about these, but he does say that without a doubt, very succinctly, you have to look at clinical symptoms and not obsess about the tests. Okay, it's 2022 and still the tests are not that great. There are some tests that are better than others, but we have to tune into how we feel and gather clues and gather information. And that is how we figure out what's happening with us. And that is how we can get better treatment, whichever route that you go down. So that's why I want to talk about Lyme. It's like, hey, let's get comfortable talking about how you feel, because that's where the information lies. That's where the hidden jewels, I want to call it that. That's where the most important information is like, well, how do you feel? Because that's how a diagnosis could be made by a Lyme literate practitioner. Okay. Okay, so speaking of, I want to talk about Lyme and the co-infections to give space to my body and healing. This is a time where I'm dedicated. I mean, not so much this video, but let's say in the future if I make more. I do a lot of private healing. In fact, I do a ton. And I don't mean healing in like I'm overcoming illness and becoming better and healthier. So much of that healing is coping with intense pain and sickness and problems. It's like dueling yourself through a sucky situation. That's so much of what I do. And I do that privately. Sometimes I talk about it, but it just doesn't really come up in normal conversation. It doesn't even really come up with my acupuncture peers or my herbalist friends, or even the spiritual healers or astrologers or those type of practitioners that I work with. It just doesn't really come up. It's something that I do privately. So even though continually coping with and being with my sick and painful self has been kind of the basis of my entire life and existence, I keep it private. I don't share it with my friends and family generally. I sometimes write about it online or something, but I think that for myself, and I hope for other people too, that part of chronically ill people with Lyme and co-infections, feeling heard and seen is to see and hear your own self. Like, I need to listen to my own ill self. And you don't have to do it publicly. I don't have to. I don't think it's so much the platform of which you speak, but for me, I need to become more comfortable at vocalizing how these infections run my life and how I can stop that from happening. So what I hope that speaking about Lyme and the co-infections can do for myself, and maybe for others, I don't really know, is that it can give a positive and deliberate time and space. It can give an outlet for talking about how I feel, right? It's like I'm showing up to let that part of myself speak, and I'm listening to it. And yeah, I journal and I write stuff down, and I'm constantly in this healing zone, and I live it every day. But there's something about creating a narrative and doing personal storytelling and health storytelling that can be very, very therapeutic. And it's wonderful if it's therapeutic in the way that helps you overcome an illness or gives you a great clue as to how you can heal yourself. That's great. But most of the time, it's helping you process and have self-compassion. It's more about the coping with and not the curing. Like, I just want to take curing out of there. Healing does not equal curing in this instance, or I would just say anytime. So there was some research about people who had migraines. And if a person who had migraines went to their doctor and were able to tell their full migraine story, those people got better. And that was regardless of the type of treatment they had. Sometimes the doctor wouldn't even give them a treatment. Sometimes they would. It didn't matter what the prescription was. It was the fact that the person, I think the researchers were suggesting, we don't really know for sure, right? That if a person was able to tell their full migraine story and be heard, somehow something happened within that healing dynamic that they had a better outcome. Was it simply just being heard? Is that a factor? I would probably say yes. I'd have to look more into it. The problem is that it took 8 minutes for somebody on average to tell their migraine story. And if some doctor has a 15-minute appointment with you, like, they might just interrupt because they have to, let alone all the other questions that come in. I do this when I see people for acupuncture. I'm like, wait, what was that detail? Tell me that again. How about this? How does that relate to this? Like, I have to remember, like, okay, tell your whole story and we'll ask questions later. So, that's not exactly the same as medical storytelling, health storytelling, or creating a personal narrative, but it kind of is. It's give me the time and space to tell a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because if you're chronically ill and you have Lyme and co-infections and chronic pain, whatever, there is no beginning, middle, and end. It's your life all the time. So if you can kind of put it into a smaller chunk, it becomes more easily digestible, something you can relate to, and it gives you a chance to relate to your story in a different way. Now, there's all sorts of research about medical storytelling, personal narratives for healing. So it would be a good thing to look into if you're more interested, but I think you get the gist. Like just letting it out, saying it, writing it down, beginning, middle, and end, giving yourself time and space can be very, very therapeutic. Okay, the last reason that I want to talk about Lyme and the co-infections more openly is because a very personal reason. I want to accept and see the messing, walking health crisis part of myself, because I think that's just as valid as the part of me that wants to be very scientific, that wants me to be a professional, a practitioner, and look at research and whatnot. Now, I want to be clear that what I'm speaking of at different times is subjective, right? So I don't want to say that something I think is truth for everybody or is proven or something. So it's okay to talk about subjective experiences. Just be aware that that's where that's coming from. It's been hard because I kept thinking that, oh, I'll talk about Lyme when I feel better. Well, it might take a long time to feel better. I have had Lyme at least since I was 8 and I'm almost 40. So like, what if that just doesn't come? I mean, I think it will come, but like, for instance, right now I'm feeling a lot better than I was many years ago. I haven't been working really for 4 years with kind of dealing with the acute Lyme, and I have been better in the last year, but I have some neuropathy in my hand, so I can't type very well, I can't use my phone, and I just, no matter how hard I wish for it, I can't spend a lot of time searching on PubMed and typing up more like informational type articles at this point. And that makes me sad. I do mourn that loss of myself. I'm a Gemini. I have 6 planets in air signs. Give me information. Give me the research. Give me the logic. Like, I love that. But I really want to be more comfortable accepting the felt, experiential, subjective, non-linear, and non-logical part of my own Lyme experience, because that's who I am. Like, the Lyme and the co-infections don't care how up to date I am on research. They just are going to do what they want. And so why am I hanging all of my expression about it until I can do that? Well, that's something I need to work on with myself. I don't even want to go into it, but sometimes I feel like, I think it comes back to feeling invalidated by the medical community. And I often think that if I just have a little bit more research, maybe they'll believe me. Now, that's a problem that I have, because sometimes people don't need more research. They just don't want to believe it. So I tend to be a little bit naive about that. So, like, it's not about logic and making things make sense and giving everybody equal opportunities to be heard. Sometimes we have biases, and I shouldn't let that get into the way of letting myself be heard as a person with Lyme and the co-infections, because we are our own authorities of who we are, and that would be true no matter where you are born, what your education level is, what century you were born in before Western medicine and scientific research and PubMed even existed. Like, it still would be true. So let's validate that and embrace it. Okay, so those were my reasons of why I want to talk about Lyme and the co-infections. Okay, Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.